It seems like every time Puerto Rico is on American news, it's because of some conflict, some terrible inefficiency that has allowed for flooding streets, brightly colored houses in ruins, an economy in disrepair. We see Hurricane Maria, Fiona on our television screens, inept political leaders, Puerto Rican voices held unequal and unheard for far too long but still fighting back. How did we get here? How did a once flourishing island community fracture under the weight of colonialism, and how have some of its people responded to being second-class citizens with unequal rights? To begin to tell this story, we must travel back to when Puerto Rican's sense of self and of self-determination was first threatened. We begin our story on November 19, 1493, when Cristobal Colombo landed on this island and claimed it for the Spanish crown. The conquistadores named the island Puerto Rico in recognition of the natural riches of the land, with these abundant resources making Puerto Rico critical to colonial profit. But Spanish colonialism in Puerto Rico wasn't just the exploitation of a fertile land, it was the destruction of a people. Long before it gained the name Puerto Rico, this island was called Borinquen by its indigenous community, the Taíno. As described by Puerto Rican legal scholar Pedro Malevet Vega, the first Spanish slaves in Puerto Rico were the natives, with the Taíno forced to labor for the Christian invaders and take on their religion as their own. Under this labor system, known as the encomienda, the Taíno lost not only the means to control their lives, but were also stripped of their culture under Catholic rule. With the continued desolation of the Taíno, the Spanish soon brought in West African enslaved people to replace them in the agricultural plantations. In July of 1898, over 400 years of Spanish rule in Puerto Rico ended with the invasion of U.S. troops in the midst of the Spanish-American War. But the U.S., the supposed land of the free, was not here to rescue an oppressed people. Motivated by its own imperial interests, the U.S. sought Puerto Rico and Cuba, among other island territories, to gain profit and power. It is in this context that we can begin to see the Puerto Rican legacy as a history of political silencing, the combination of Taíno and African with an oppressive Spanish culture, and uncertainty to the question, who are Puerto Ricans and where do we belong? Under Spanish colonialism, Puerto Ricans were strangers in their own land without citizenships, rights, or representation. Puerto Ricans did eventually gain U.S. citizenship in the 1910s, but they still could not vote or be politically represented in national politics, making the citizenship unequal and second class. Their land and their identities were still being stolen and reformed by others. But Puerto Ricans did not just sit idly by as their land passed from one hand to the next. In 1913, the U.S. first considered offering citizenship to Puerto Ricans, but collectively, the Puerto Rican people were not pleased. Neither was the Speaker of the Puerto Rican House of Delegates, José de Diego. Knowing that this form of citizenship would be oppressive and only add to U.S. control, Diego passionately put into words a widespread sentiment. In an open letter to the U.S. Senate, he shared, "We are citizens of Puerto Rico and selfish of our own citizenship, selfish of our history and our struggles, of our sufferings, of our hopes of emancipation, of our blood, of our language, of our flesh and our spirit." Diego's passionate conviction and cultural pride, even as a political figure under the close supervision of the U.S., demonstrates a tension between the U.S. government and Puerto Ricans that is still very alive today. It is the passionate frustration of not being seen or heard, grappling with not being a full citizen with full representation in your own country, which has defined many Puerto Rican experiences. And so, it is in instances like these that Puerto Ricans have reclaimed their power by defining themselves and what citizenship means to them. Puerto Rico represents a history of trauma, of silencing, of pain, but its people have shaped their identities by building communities based on cultural pride. It was Puerto Ricans like Diego who asserted themselves and their power in the transition between colonial powers. It was their children and grandchildren who asserted a unique Puerto Rican identity when they built communities as immigrants to the U.S. Just like Diego feared, the U.S. has continued to exploit Puerto Rico and its nature as a colony. Second-class U.S. citizenship has allowed U.S. corporations to take indigenous lands and leave much of the population in poverty. Even today, second-class citizenship allows for destruction in the face of natural disasters and climate change. But Puerto Ricans will not stay silent. They will continue to assert their power by reclaiming their identities. Puerto Rico still has a sense of culture, a sense of pride, and by recognizing this unifying experience and amplifying each other's voices, Puerto Ricans can never be silenced.